What would make a man hang up on his own flesh and blood at the very moment when grief should have united them? Picture it, a phone line connecting Montecito to London, the weight of a funeral looming, a widow's legacy about to be laid to rest, and in the middle of it all, a desperate son, brother, outcast prince, begging, not for himself, but for the woman who has stood at his side through exile, controversy, and scandal. And on the other end of the line, silence. Then a curt, clipped rejection. And finally, click, the line goes dead. That's how this story begins. A moment of shocking finality that rippled through the corridors of Buckingham Palace and the quiet streets of Windsor alike. But before we dive into that dramatic phone call, let's rewind. Because the death of Katherine, Duchess of Kent, at the age of 92, was no ordinary royal passing. This wasn't just another name added to the long list of aristocrats fading into history. This was the loss of a figure who embodied grace, humility, and quiet devotion to service. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. She wasn't the queen. She wasn't in the direct line of succession. And yet, she mattered. She mattered to the royals as a stabilizing presence, and she mattered to the British public as a rare example of royalty who seemed untouched by arrogance. So when news broke that she had passed, a wave of nostalgia, grief, and respect swept across the nation. But not everyone was welcome to grieve. Not everyone could show up and bow their head. And that's where this story explodes. Harry, estranged, criticized, accused of betrayal, wanted in. He wanted to be there. He wanted Meghan beside him. But here's the question for you. Was that desire rooted in love, or was it strategy? Did Harry want Meghan at his side to honor the Duchess of Kent? Or did he see an opportunity to force reconciliation, to claw back respectability, to make a show of unity that the royals weren't ready to accept? Because the funeral of a duchess was never just about mourning. For Harry and Meghan, it could have been a stage, a moment to step back into the fold, or to be rejected yet again. Now think about the Duke of Kent, a man steeped in tradition, a man who has lived his entire life as the guardian of a fading but still potent royal mystique. He knew what this funeral meant. He knew the cameras would be there. He knew the eyes of the Commonwealth and beyond would be watching. And he knew what it would look like if Meghan Markle walked into that church, clad in black, arm in arm with Harry. It would overshadow Katherine's life. It would turn grief into gossip. It would shift the headlines from tribute to scandal. And so when Harry called, the Duke made a decision. Tradition over sentiment. Duty over blood. He cut the line. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The introduction of this story is not about the phone call alone. It's about setting the stage for why that call mattered so much, and why it became a flashpoint in an already fractured family. Consider this. In the last 5 years, funerals have become war zones for the Windsors. When Prince Philip died in 2021, the world waited to see if Harry would appear. He did. Meghan, heavily pregnant at the time, stayed in California. It was awkward. Cold. William and Harry barely exchanged words. Then came Queen Elizabeth II's funeral in 2022. Again, tension was thick. Again, Meghan's presence was questioned, scrutinized, debated. Every move, every look, every tear, or lack of one, was dissected. And now, with Katherine gone, the cycle threatened to repeat. But this time, the stakes felt different. Katherine wasn't just another royal relative. She was a woman who had quietly carried the dignity of the monarchy while others stumbled. To many inside the palace, allowing Meghan to attend wasn't just unwise, it was disrespectful. Still, Harry didn't see it that way. From his perspective, he was her husband. Meghan was his partner. Why shouldn't she stand beside him? Why should his family dictate who could mourn and who couldn't? In Harry's mind, grief was universal. In the royals' minds, grief was hierarchical. That tension, that clash of worldviews, is what made the phone call so explosive. But before we get to that call, let's ask ourselves something deeper. Why now? Why does this story matter today, in 2025? Because the monarchy is wobbling. King Charles faces health rumors. William is preparing for his future reign, and public trust in the royals is fragile. Every scandal chips away at the facade. Every misstep fuels whispers of irrelevance. And Harry? Harry is the wild card. The prince who could either destroy the institution or redeem it, depending on which path he chooses. And so the funeral of a 92-year-old duchess, someone who once seemed peripheral, became a battlefield for the soul of the monarchy. Now picture the scene again. Harry in California, staring at his phone, thumb hovering over the call button. He knows what he's about to ask. He knows the odds are against him, but he dials anyway. On the other end, in London, the Duke of Kent answers. The voice of history, tradition, duty. And within minutes, maybe even seconds, the conversation shatters. But what exactly was said? What tone did Harry use? Pleading, angry, determined? And how did the Duke deliver his rejection? With icy calm, with blunt cruelty, with weary finality. That's where our story is headed. Because the truth is, this wasn't just a phone call. This was a symbol. A symbol of everything broken between Harry and his family. A symbol of the battle between love and duty. A symbol of how grief can either heal wounds or deepen them. And in this case, it deepened them. But here's the twist. While Harry was left reeling from that rejection, Meghan herself was not sitting idly by. She had her own plans, her own strategies, her own responses to being cut out of yet another royal moment. And those plans would make the fallout from the phone call even more complicated than anyone could have imagined. So buckle in. Because what starts with a funeral and a phone call spirals into something much larger. A clash of identities, a test of tradition, and a question that cuts to the heart of the monarchy itself. Can Harry ever truly return, or has the bridge been burned beyond repair? And that is where the story of Catherine's death stops being about her life and starts being about what comes after. But here's the cliffhanger you need to hold on to. The phone call between Harry and the Duke of Kent didn't just end a conversation. It ended a possibility. And what came next would change not only Harry's future, but the monarchy's. Why did the death of a quiet, humble duchess suddenly ignite a storm that rippled across the monarchy? Why did the passing of Katherine, Duchess of Kent, matter so deeply, not only to those within the palace walls, but also to those watching around the globe? To answer that, we need to step back in time and peel back the layers of her extraordinary, understated life. Because the funeral Harry begged to attend with Meghan wasn't just any service. It was the farewell of a woman whose life embodied duty, dignity, and devotion in ways that few royals ever managed. Katherine wasn't the type of royal you saw plastered across tabloids every week. She wasn't a headline chaser. She wasn't embroiled in endless scandals. And maybe that's why she stood out. Because while others stumbled, while some royals fell prey to whispers of arrogance, hypocrisy, or scandal, Katherine remained, quietly, a beacon of respect. She was the kind of royal who didn't need to shout to be heard, the kind who didn't need to scheme to stay relevant. And isn't that ironic? That the one who spoke softly left behind the loudest legacy? So, who exactly was Katherine, Duchess of Kent? And why did her life's ending spark such intensity in Harry, the Duke of Kent, and the monarchy itself? Let's begin at the start. Born Catherine Lucy Mary Worsley in 1933, she wasn't born into the heart of the monarchy. No, she was an outsider, in many ways like Meghan, yet her story unfolded in stark contrast. Catherine entered the royal fold not through centuries of bloodlines, but through marriage. In 1961, she married Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, cousin to Queen Elizabeth II. And from that moment, her life became a delicate balancing act between duty and individuality. She could have been swallowed by the institution. She could have become another silent consort, fading into the background. But Catherine chose a different path. She carved her identity in quiet rebellion. Not the dramatic, headline-making rebellion of Meghan and Harry, but a softer, subtler kind. For instance, did you know Catherine was the first member of the royal family in modern times to convert to Catholicism? Think about that. In a family where religion and monarchy are intertwined, where the monarch is literally the head of the Church of England, Catherine's choice to embrace Catholicism in 1994 was nothing short of groundbreaking. It wasn't loud, it wasn't performative, but it was courageous. And yet, instead of sparking wars within the family, her decision was respected. Why? Because she handled it with humility, not with provocation. She didn't weaponize her difference. She lived it quietly, with dignity. But religion wasn't the only way she broke the mold. Catherine also became known for her humanitarian spirit. She worked tirelessly in education, music, and charities. Unlike others who sometimes wore charity work as a PR shield, Katherine genuinely immersed herself in it. She served as a teacher at a primary school. Imagine that. A royal in a classroom, chalk in hand, surrounded by children who probably had no idea of her status. Who does that? Certainly not many modern royals. She was deeply involved in the world of music, too. A patron of musical institutions, she used her position to uplift culture rather than her own image. The Duchess was known to attend recitals, support young musicians, and immerse herself in the beauty of the arts. So, when we look at Catherine's life, we see a woman who could have chosen extravagance but instead chose humility. A woman who could have demanded attention but instead redirected it toward causes that mattered. In many ways, she represented the very qualities the monarchy wished to project but often failed to live up to. And here's the contradiction. While Katherine embodied service and humility, Harry and Meghan have often been accused of embodying self-interest and spectacle. That's why the idea of Meghan attending Catherine's funeral wasn't just controversial, it was incendiary. Because Catherine's life represented everything Meghan was accused of undermining. Let me ask you, can you imagine the optics? The cameras capturing Meghan walking behind Catherine's coffin. Headlines screaming about rifts, side glances, and icy exchanges. Do you think the press would have focused on Catherine's legacy or on Meghan's presence? Exactly. That's what the Duke of Kent knew. That's why he drew the line. But let's not move too quickly. Let's stay with Katherine a little longer. Because understanding her story helps us understand why her funeral became the stage for yet another royal showdown. Katherine was also known for her personal struggles. Few realized that behind her calm, graceful exterior, she carried deep burdens. She faced miscarriages, the loss of an unborn child, and long battles with depression. She once admitted openly to suffering from clinical depression, a shocking confession for a royal at the time, when such things were swept under the rug. She was candid about it, at a time when mental health was shrouded in shame. Sound familiar? Harry himself has built a platform on speaking openly about mental health. And yet, how different their approaches were received. Catherine's candor was seen as bravery. Harry's, at times, is seen as grievance. Why the difference? Was it tone, timing, or the public's patience with what they perceive as constant complaint versus dignified vulnerability? That contrast is what made this funeral even more symbolic. Katherine and Harry, in different ways, both opened up about personal pain. But one was embraced, the other alienated. And so, the Duchess's passing became more than a personal loss. It became a mirror, reflecting everything the royal family admired and everything they feared. Now, picture the funeral that was being planned. A service filled with music, faith, and quiet dignity. A gathering of royals who may disagree behind closed doors, but present unity to the world. And then imagine the disruption Meghan's presence could bring. Was it fair? Was it just? Perhaps not. But perception often outweighs fairness. Let's dig deeper. Katherine was not just beloved for what she did, but for what she didn't do. She didn't court controversy. She didn't exploit her position. She didn't trade royal secrets for publicity. Instead, she lived a life that reminded people of the monarchy's higher purpose, even if others tarnished it. So when Harry insisted Meghan should attend, it wasn't simply a request. It was a collision course. Meghan, often accused of embodying the very opposite of Catherine's virtues, stepping into a funeral meant to honor those virtues? To many, it was unthinkable. And here's where the irony burns. Meghan, like Katherine, was an outsider who married into the royal family. Meghan, like Katherine, has faced criticism for her choices, her faith, her identity. Meghan, like Katherine, wanted to carve her own path. But the outcomes couldn't be more different. One earned quiet respect. The other, relentless hostility. Why? Was it timing? Was it the rise of a digital world where every move is scrutinized in real time? Or was it a difference in strategy, humility versus confrontation? Ask yourself, had Meghan chosen Catherine's quiet approach instead of a media blitz, would she now be walking into that funeral without controversy? The point is this: Catherine's life and her death became a stage not only for mourning but for comparison. She was the measuring stick against which Meghan's every move would be judged. And Harry knew it. The Duke of Kent knew it. Everyone knew it. That's why the phone call carried so much weight. It wasn't just about a husband asking for his wife's inclusion. It was about a clash of legacies, one of humility one of spectacle. But before Harry dialed, before the Duke of Kent cut him off, the groundwork was already laid. The funeral was never going to be a simple farewell. It was destined to be another battleground. And that's why Catherine's passing at 92 wasn't just the closing of a chapter. It was the opening of another. A chapter filled with confrontation, rejection, and choices that will haunt the royals for years to come. Because the Duchess's life stood for one thing. Harry and Meghan's choices, rightly or wrongly, are seen as another. And when those two realities collided at her funeral, something had to give. The Duke of Kent made sure of that. But what exactly happened when Harry's call came through? What words were exchanged? What tone hardened into finality? And what did the abrupt hang-up mean for the fragile threads of reconciliation still holding the family together? That's where we go next. What happens to a family when the rift grows so wide that even funerals cannot bridge it? What kind of pain runs so deep that instead of uniting in grief, loved ones weaponize silence, rejection, and even a cut phone line? To understand why the Duke of Kent slammed down the receiver on Harry, we need to dive headfirst into the fissure that's been splitting the House of Windsor for years. Because this wasn't just a call cut short. It was the sound of decades of tension finally snapping. Let's go back. Back to the very moment Harry and Meghan first stepped away from their roles as senior royals. January 2020. The world still blissfully unaware of the storm of a global pandemic looming, and the Sussexes dropping their bombshell. They were stepping back. That phrase, so careful, so sanitized, hid the chaos it unleashed. The press went wild. The family reeled. And from that moment, the rift began. But was that really the beginning? Or was it merely the explosion of a time bomb that had been ticking since Harry was a boy? Think of Diana's death in 1997. Think of a young Harry, only 12 years old, walking behind his mother's coffin as the world watched in silence. Think of the trauma baked into his very identity. Did the seeds of rebellion, mistrust, and bitterness take root then? Ask yourself. Could anyone, even William, truly understand the storm inside him? Fast forward to Meghan's arrival. For a time, the family seemed to embrace her. The fairy tale headlines of 2018, American actress marries prince, sparked dreams of a modern, inclusive monarchy. Crowds cheered. The Queen welcomed. The wedding dazzled. But behind the scenes, cracks already forming. Reports of tension between Meghan and Katherine. Stories of staff resigning. Rumors of Meghan's sharp tongue, her unwillingness to bow to protocol. And William? William allegedly urged caution, telling Harry, "Take your time." Advice that Harry took not as brotherly concern, but as insult. From that moment, William wasn't just the big brother. He was the enemy. This rift wasn't about one fight. It wasn't about one woman. It was about identity. Harry no longer wanted to be the spare. He no longer wanted to live in William's shadow. Meghan didn't want to be the silent, smiling consort. Together, they wanted something new, freedom, independence, control. And so they left. But the royals don't forgive easily. Especially not when your departure feels like betrayal. Remember the Oprah interview in 2021? The accusations of racism. The claims of neglect during Meghan's mental health struggles. The shocking allegation that a member of the royal family questioned Archie's skin color. That wasn't just a crack in the dam, it was a flood. Suddenly, the world was no longer seeing a family feud. They were seeing the monarchy itself accused of prejudice, cruelty, and hypocrisy. The palace responded with silence, the famous line, "Recollections may vary." But inside, fury. A family that thrives on image felt humiliated on the global stage. And Harry? He wasn't done. Because then came the Netflix docuseries. Long hours of intimate footage, confessionals, claims of betrayal. The world watched as Harry and Meghan painted their story in vivid color. Meghan in tears. Harry accusing his family of planting stories. Scenes of Montecito bliss juxtaposed with images of royal rigidity. The message was clear. They were free, and the royals were cold, outdated, and cruel. And as if that wasn't enough, Harry dropped Spare in 2023. Page after page of raw, bitter honesty. He confessed to drug use. He described fights with William. He painted Charles as distant, Camilla as scheming. He aired the family's darkest laundry for the world to consume. Can you imagine how the Duke of Kent, a man who lived his entire life upholding royal secrecy, must have felt? To him, Harry's actions weren't just rebellious, they were sacrilegious. The very fabric of the monarchy was built on silence, on never explaining, on never complaining. And here was Harry, explaining and complaining to the entire planet. Now put yourself in the shoes of the royals when Catherine, Duchess of Kent, passed away. A moment that should have been sacred. A moment that should have been free of politics. But when Harry reached for the phone, begging for Meghan's inclusion, what did the Duke hear? Did he hear a grieving grandson-in-law? Or did he hear the same Harry who had sold secrets, accused the family, and humiliated them again and again? This is the contradiction that defines the rift. Harry sees himself as speaking truth, standing up for love, breaking cycles of silence. The royals see him as destructive, disloyal, reckless. And Meghan? To Harry, she's the woman who saved him. To the royals, she's the woman who weaponized him. Two narratives, two truths, irreconcilable. That's why reconciliation at Catherine's funeral was never going to happen. The rift had become too wide, the distrust too heavy. But let's get more specific. How did each royal view Harry by the time of Catherine's death? Charles, torn. A father who still loves his son but cannot forget the betrayal. His reign already fragile, his health uncertain. Could he afford to be seen embracing Harry, let alone Meghan, at such a delicate time? William, furious. His anger at Harry had hardened into something resembling disdain. He didn't just see Harry as misguided. He saw him as dangerous to the institution he would one day inherit. Camilla, wary. Painted as the villain in Harry's memoir, she likely wanted nothing to do with him, let alone Meghan. Katherine, heartbroken. Once close to Harry, she now kept her distance. Meghan's alleged treatment of her, the tears, the stories, it had left scars. And the Duke of Kent, unyielding. To him, Harry had crossed too many lines. And Meghan represented a direct threat to everything Catherine's life had stood for. So when Harry begged, when he asked for one exception, one act of grace, the answer was not just no, it was a rejection decades in the making. But here's the twist. For all the anger and bitterness, there's another side. A contradiction that makes this story even more painful. Because while the royals saw Harry as a traitor, millions around the world saw him as brave. They saw him as the son of Diana, fighting the same battles she fought, standing against the same institution that destroyed her. They saw Meghan as his partner, not his corrupter. They saw love, not betrayal. So who's right? Who's wrong? Or is the truth somewhere in the middle? And this brings us back to the phone call. A call that wasn't just about Meghan attending a funeral. It was about whether the rift could ever be healed, whether Harry could ever return, whether the monarchy could ever forgive. The answer came in the sound of silence and the slam of a receiver. But what exactly did Harry say in that moment of desperation? And how did the Duke of Kent respond before cutting him off? What words lit the fuse that ended the conversation forever? That's where we go next. Have you ever felt the weight of desperation in a single phone call? That trembling moment when every word you choose could either heal a wound or split it open forever. That was the moment Harry found himself in when he dialed London. He wasn't calling as a prince. He wasn't calling as the rebellious spare. He was calling as a man torn between love and family, begging for a chance to bring Meghan to Catherine's funeral. But what he didn't know was that this call would be cut short so brutally, it would leave an echo that still reverberates through the monarchy today. Imagine the scene. Montecito. Harry, pacing, phone in hand. Meghan close by, perhaps urging him on, perhaps silent, her presence itself heavy in the room. Across the ocean, the Duke of Kent, old, weary, yet unbending, answers the call. Tradition personified, decades of royal discipline in his voice. This wasn't just another conversation. It was a collision of two worlds, two philosophies, two truths. Uncle. Harry might have begun, his voice heavy with tension. Already, you can picture the strain. Do you think he sounded calm, rehearsed, or desperate, stumbling, choosing words like a drowning man reaching for driftwood? He knew what he wanted. He knew what he had to ask. And so he said it. Meghan must come with him to the funeral. Not as an accessory, not as a guest, but as his partner, his wife, his equal. Now pause. Imagine the silence on the other end. The Duke of Kent, stiff, hand tightening around the receiver. To him, this wasn't about equality. It wasn't about partnership. It was about the sanctity of a funeral, the preservation of dignity, the upholding of tradition. Catherine's farewell wasn't meant to be overshadowed by whispers of scandal or lenses zoomed in on Meghan's every movement. And then the Duke spoke. Harry, he might have said, measured, deliberate, voice cold as marble. This is not the time, nor the place. But Harry didn't back down. He pressed harder. She's my wife. If I come, she comes. That's how it has to be. Can you feel the tension? Can you hear the clash? The Duke, now less patient. No, Harry, not this time. This is about Katherine. It is not about Meghan. Do you understand? Harry's voice rising, his frustration breaking through. Why is it always like this? Why is she always the one excluded? Do you not see what this does to me, to us? And the Duke, final, unyielding. Enough. The answer is no. Then, the silence. The kind of silence that fills your chest with ice. And before Harry could respond, before he could argue further, the line went dead. Click. Do you see it? This wasn't just a rejection. It was a symbolic execution of whatever fragile bridge might have remained between Harry and the family. One word, one hang-up, one funeral invitation denied. But let's go deeper. Why did Harry insist so stubbornly? Why did he risk humiliation in a phone call he must have known wouldn't end well? Was it love? Was it pride? Or was it something else, something more strategic? Some believe Harry wanted Meghan at that funeral to rewrite the narrative, to show the world they were still part of the family, still entitled to grieve together. Others say it was about control, Harry refusing once again to bow to royal protocol, insisting on doing things his way. But here's the contradiction. Harry, who once fought against royal rules, now begging to bend them for Meghan's sake. Doesn't that strike you as ironic? He left because he didn't want to play by their rules, and now he was pleading for exceptions. And the Duke? He wasn't blind to that irony. To him, it wasn't about Harry's plea. It was about protecting Catherine's legacy from being overshadowed by tabloid frenzy. Imagine the headlines if Meghan had appeared. Royal rift explodes at Duchess's funeral. All eyes on Meghan, not Katherine. That's what the Duke feared. That's why he slammed the door shut. But here's where it gets more human, more heartbreaking. For Harry, this wasn't just about Meghan being present. It was about not facing his family alone. Can you imagine walking into that church, filled with cold stares, whispers behind your back, siblings who treat you like a stranger? Harry didn't want to be that man, alone in a pew, isolated in grief. He wanted his partner beside him, someone to squeeze his hand, to reassure him that he wasn't completely cut off from love. Do you blame him for that? And yet, the Duke couldn't allow it. To him, Meghan's presence meant disrespect. To Harry, her absence meant abandonment. Two men, two truths, crashing headlong into each other. So what happened after the click? Reports suggest Harry was left furious, pacing, devastated. Meghan, perhaps telling him it proved once again that the family would never accept her. Perhaps she reminded him of the slights, the accusations, the whispers. Perhaps she fueled his anger, or perhaps she shared his pain in silence. Either way, Harry was left with a choice: attend alone or not at all. And that choice would determine not only how the world saw him, but how his family would judge him for years to come. This phone call was more than words. It was a turning point, a line in the sand, a final act of rejection dressed as tradition. But here's the real question. What did that hang-up mean for the monarchy itself? Was it the act of a strong institution refusing to be swayed? Or was it a sign of brittleness, a family so fractured it could no longer bend without breaking? Because after that call, nothing was the same. The whispers grew louder. The speculation spiraled. And Harry's humiliation became yet another wound in the long list of royal betrayals. But the story doesn't end here. Because Meghan, left out once again, wasn't ready to accept defeat. She had her own response, her own way of making sure her absence would still be felt. And that's the twist you need to prepare for. Because what Meghan did next would take this rift to an even darker place, and leave the family asking themselves whether the hang-up was truly the end, or just the beginning. Why was Meghan Markle never going to be welcome at Catherine's funeral? Was it really about protocol, or was it something much deeper, something personal, raw, and unresolved within the walls of Buckingham Palace? Because make no mistake, the rejection of Meghan was not just a matter of tradition. It was a matter of mistrust, memory, and the scars of past encounters that never healed. Let's pull the curtain back. Meghan's absence wasn't accidental. It wasn't incidental. It was deliberate. A decision shaped by years of history, by wounds still bleeding. Think back to Prince Philip's funeral in 2021. Meghan didn't attend, officially because she was heavily pregnant with Lilibet. On the surface, understandable, but her absence sparked speculation. Some said it was to avoid overshadowing the somber event. Others whispered it was because she was unwelcome, that her presence would have turned the funeral into a spectacle. The tension in the air was already suffocating. Harry walking apart from William, eyes fixed forward, lips sealed tight. Now imagine Meghan there. Cameras flashing. Commentators dissecting her every movement. Would the world have focused on Philip's life of service? Or on Meghan's strained smiles? On who greeted her and who ignored her? Then, Queen Elizabeth II's funeral in 2022. Meghan was there. And the world's eyes, once again, turned not to the Queen's legacy but to Meghan's presence. Every frame analyzed. Was Katherine ignoring her? Was William glaring? Did Meghan wipe away a tear sincerely or performatively? Even her black attire, her jewelry, her expressions, all dissected endlessly. So by the time Katherine, Duchess of Kent, passed away, the lesson was clear to the royals. Meghan's presence meant distraction. Meghan's presence meant the story would shift from tribute to tension. But it wasn't just about optics. It was about relationships, fractured, frayed, and unforgiven. Let's talk about Katherine, Princess of Wales. Do you remember the infamous bridesmaid dress incident? Meghan claimed Katherine made her cry. Katherine, by contrast, let it be known that Meghan had reduced her to tears. Two women, two stories. Both never fully reconciled. That incident became the symbol of everything broken between them. And imagine Katherine at Katherine's funeral, already burdened with grief, forced to stand alongside Meghan, the woman she sees as both rival and tormentor. Could you feel the chill in that room? And William, the heir to the throne. His fury at Harry is well documented, but his mistrust of Meghan cuts even deeper. To William, Meghan isn't just his sister-in-law. She's the force that pulled Harry away, the voice that amplified his grievances, the partner who weaponized private family pain for public consumption. Do you think William would have tolerated her presence at the side of his grieving relatives? Or would her arrival have been seen as yet another intrusion into a family moment she had no right to own? Then there's Camilla, Queen Consort, painted as the scheming stepmother in Harry's memoir, accused of planting stories in the press. The tension between Meghan and Camilla is said to be icy, mutual, and unyielding. Imagine Camilla walking into Katherine's funeral, only to see Meghan waiting inside. The whispers, the tension, the explosive headlines. It would have been unbearable. And finally, the Duke of Kent himself. To him, Katherine was more than his wife. She was his life's companion, his anchor, his source of quiet strength. The idea of her funeral being overshadowed by Meghan Markle must have felt like a personal insult. The Duke wasn't just defending royal dignity, he was protecting his wife's memory. But let's go even further back. Why did Meghan's presence stir such resentment in the first place? It goes back to the perception, fair or not, that Meghan played the role of disruptor. Some in the palace saw her as ambitious, hungry for spotlight, unwilling to adapt to the unspoken rules of royal life. A royal wife, traditionally, blends in, supports quietly, smiles, waves, attends charity galas. But Meghan? She spoke out. She challenged. She questioned why things were done a certain way. And the royals, an institution built on tradition, didn't like it. Ask yourself, did Meghan ever truly stand a chance of being accepted? Or was the game rigged from the start? Because let's be honest, Meghan brought change. She brought energy. She brought a perspective the royal family hadn't seen before. But instead of embracing it, they resisted. Instead of adapting, they recoiled. And every step Meghan took, every speech, every interview, every appearance, was twisted into evidence that she didn't belong. So when Harry begged to bring her to Katherine's funeral, it wasn't just about Meghan standing by his side. It was about forcing the family to accept someone they had spent years rejecting. And here's the cruel twist. Meghan herself must have known she wasn't welcome. But was she hurt, angry, or secretly relieved? Did she want to walk into that icy room, face those piercing stares, endure the judgment of an entire family who never forgave her? Or did she see an opportunity, knowing that being excluded would make her a victim once again, fueling sympathy and narrative in her favor? Because let's face it, exclusion can be powerful. It tells a story of cruelty, of rejection, of a woman shut out by the world's most famous family. And for Meghan, every rejection fuels her larger narrative. The woman wronged, the woman silenced, the woman cast aside for daring to be different. But this isn't just about Meghan versus the royals. It's about Catherine's legacy. And the truth is, the Duchess of Kent represented everything Meghan was accused of not being. Humble, discreet, devoted to service without making it about herself. Meghan's presence at Catherine's funeral would have been more than controversial. It would have been a contradiction. A clash of two legacies, side by side. And that's why the Duke of Kent didn't just reject Harry's plea, he cut it off. Brutally. Final. The risk was too great. Now let's not overlook one more angle, the public. Because even if Meghan had been welcomed, how would the British people have reacted? Would crowds lining the streets have cheered her? Or would they have muttered under their breath, rolled their eyes, even booed? The monarchy thrives on public sentiment, and public sentiment around Meghan has been volatile, divided, and often hostile. Could the royal family really risk headlines like, "Mourners jeer Meghan at Duchess's funeral"? No, they couldn't. So Meghan stayed away. But staying away didn't end the story, it lit another fire. Because exclusion breeds speculation. It breeds bitterness. It breeds drama. And Meghan, far from being silenced, now had another chapter in her story of rejection. And that raises the most haunting question of all. Did the Duke of Kent's rejection protect Catherine's funeral? Or did it hand Meghan another weapon to use against the monarchy in the court of public opinion? Because while the royals celebrated dignity, Meghan could now claim discrimination. While they insisted on tradition, she could point to exclusion. And Harry? He was caught in the middle, once again torn between the family he was born into and the woman he chose. But here's the cliffhanger. While Meghan may have been physically absent from the funeral, her shadow loomed larger than anyone could have predicted. And what she did in response to that exclusion would prove that even in absence, she could dominate the story. Was Harry's insistence on bringing Meghan to Catherine's funeral really about love? Or was there something more calculated behind it? That's the question that keeps echoing long after the Duke of Kent cut off the line. Because when you peel back the emotion, the pleading, the frustration, what you're left with is a prince who may have been fighting two battles at once. One for his marriage, and another for his reputation. Let's strip it down. On the surface, it looked like love. A husband determined to stand by his wife, no matter the cost. Harry didn't want to leave Meghan behind in California. He didn't want to walk into that funeral alone, facing cold stares, whispered judgments, and the loneliness of a man branded an outcast. He wanted Meghan beside him, as his partner, his equal, his shield. In that sense, his desperation was deeply human. Who wouldn't want the comfort of their spouse in a moment of sorrow? But look closer. Was Harry only thinking with his heart? Or was he also thinking about optics? About how it would look if he turned up alone, while the world speculated that Meghan had been banned, rejected, or humiliated yet again? Because here's the irony. In trying to defend Meghan's dignity, Harry may have been protecting his own. Ask yourself, if Harry had attended solo, how would the headlines have read? Meghan frozen out again. Harry returns alone, no welcome in sight. The Sussex divide grows deeper. Those weren't just possibilities. They were certainties. And Harry knew it. He knew the story would frame him as weak, isolated, abandoned. So was his plea for Meghan really about her feelings, or about his fear of being humiliated? This is where the contradictions pile up. Harry left the monarchy to escape the suffocating rules. He left to build a life on his own terms. Yet here he was, on the phone, begging for an exception, pleading for permission, desperate for inclusion. Doesn't that strike you as strange? Doesn't that sound like a man caught in the very web he tried to escape? And Meghan? What role did she play in this desperation? Did she encourage him to fight, to demand, to insist on her right to stand at his side? Or did she warn him, knowing the rejection would sting, knowing the palace would never relent? We may never know, but we do know this. Meghan has always positioned herself as Harry's ally, his defender, his voice when he feels silenced. It's possible Harry felt he couldn't let her be left behind, not just for her sake, but to prove to her that he would never abandon her. That's love, yes, but isn't there also a strategy in it? Because love alone doesn't explain the timing. Harry didn't just want Meghan there to grieve. He wanted Meghan there to be seen. He wanted cameras to capture their unity. He wanted to rewrite the narrative. This time, not as the angry exile, but as the grieving son-in-law who came home with his wife to honor a duchess. Think about the symbolism. Katherine represented everything the monarchy prided itself on: humility, duty, dignity. If Meghan had been allowed to walk into that funeral, it could have been spun as reconciliation, a healing moment, a sign that the royals were finally embracing change. Harry must have seen that potential. He must have believed that Meghan's presence would force the family to acknowledge her place, not just in his life, but in their legacy. But here's where the strategy backfired. The royals didn't see healing. They saw hijacking. They didn't see reconciliation. They saw manipulation. And that's why the Duke of Kent cut him off. This raises the bigger question. Has Harry become blind to how his family perceives him? Or does he simply not care anymore? From his perspective, perhaps the desperation was about more than Meghan. Perhaps it was about proving a point, that he was still royal enough, still family enough, still worthy enough to bring his wife into the fold. If they allowed Meghan to come, it would mean acknowledgement. If they didn't, it meant rejection. And rejection was something Harry could no longer stomach. Here's the painful truth. Harry's desperation that night was as much about identity as it was about love. Who is Harry without Meghan? Who is Harry without his royal title, his family, his place in the institution? Alone, he risks being irrelevant. With Meghan, he risks being controversial. So he clings to her, not just as his wife, but as the proof that he still matters. And this desperation, this insistence, wasn't new. We've seen it before. In his memoir Spare, Harry wrote about how Meghan became his reason for breaking free, his salvation, his anchor. He's admitted openly that he fears losing her, fears failing her. In that light, his plea to the Duke of Kent wasn't just about a funeral. It was about proving to Meghan that he would always fight for her, even when it cost him everything else. But isn't that where the tragedy lies? The harder he fights for Meghan, the further he drifts from the family he once called his own. The more desperate he becomes to defend her, the more determined the royals become to reject her. It's a cycle with no end. Now imagine Harry after that call. Alone in Montecito, phone in hand, rejected. What thoughts raced through his mind? Did he feel betrayed, furious, humiliated? Did he wonder if his desperation had made him look weak? Or did he double down, convinced that the rejection only proved his family's cruelty? And Meghan, what did she say to him after the line went dead? Did she embrace him, telling him he did the right thing, that she was proud he fought for her? Or did she feel another sting of rejection, another wound from a family she believes never accepted her? This moment, the cut phone call, wasn't just a private humiliation. It was the latest chapter in a saga where love and strategy are so intertwined that even Harry himself may not know where one ends and the other begins. So I'll ask you, was Harry's desperation noble, or was it self-serving? Was it about standing by his wife, or about saving his own pride? Was it about love, or about strategy? Because here's the twist. While Harry thought his plea was about inclusion, the royals saw it as another power play. Another attempt to bend tradition, to force their hand, to make Meghan part of the story no matter what. And their rejection wasn't just about Catherine's funeral. It was about sending Harry a message: we see through you. And that message? It may have cut deeper than the hang-up itself. But if Harry's desperation was seen as strategy by the royals, what came next from inside the palace would prove that this family war was far from over. Because while Harry was licking his wounds, the royals themselves were plotting how to respond, how to shield themselves, how to make sure the world saw their side of the story. And their reaction would unleash a wave of whispers, counterleaks, and cold strategies that would make Harry's plea look like child's play in comparison. What really happens behind the palace walls when a scandalous phone call shakes the monarchy? Do the royals sit in silence, hoping it will fade? Or do they mobilize like generals preparing for war? Because after the Duke of Kent slammed down that receiver on Harry, the family's private response wasn't simply about grief. It was about damage control, about perception, and about protecting Catherine's legacy from being consumed by Meghan and Harry's ongoing drama. Inside Buckingham Palace, grief and strategy collided. The death of Katherine, Duchess of Kent, was meant to be a unifying moment. A rare chance for the royals to come together, mourn a beloved figure, and remind the world that tradition still held firm. But Harry's call had changed the mood. Instead of unity, there was suspicion. Instead of calm, tension buzzed through every corridor. Picture it. Senior aides gathering in hushed rooms, files clutched to their chests, whispers echoing down long hallways. Phones ringing, not with condolences, but with questions. Has Harry called again? What exactly did he say? What was the Duke's response? And most importantly, what if Meghan tries to come anyway? Because that was the fear. That Harry's desperation wasn't just words, it was a warning. A hint that Meghan might find another way to insert herself into the funeral, whether through a dramatic appearance, a statement, or even a well-timed media leak. The royals weren't just grieving. They were preparing. Now let's go person by person. How did each key royal react to the call? King Charles. Imagine him sitting in his study, papers scattered, eyes tired from months of stress. His reign still fragile, his health the subject of constant whispers. Hearing that his son had begged to bring Meghan, it must have cut deep. Not because he didn't love Harry, but because he knew what was at stake. He knew that if Meghan appeared, the headlines would shift instantly. Instead of "Nation Mourns Beloved Duchess," it would become "Royal Rift Erupts at Funeral." For Charles, the risk was unacceptable. But the pain? The pain of once again being forced to choose between his son and his duty, that lingered. Prince William. His reaction was colder, sharper. Where Charles wavered between love and responsibility, William felt only anger. To him, the call was just another example of Harry's selfishness. Another stunt. William allegedly told aides that Harry didn't understand the damage he was causing, that he was blinded by Meghan's influence. Imagine the fury of a brother who once shared everything with Harry, bedrooms, tutors, heartbreak, and now could barely look at his name without resentment. To William, Harry wasn't just misguided. He was dangerous. And Meghan? She was the source of it all. Katherine. Her reaction was quieter, but no less significant. Katherine, who had once been close to Harry, reportedly shook her head when she heard about the call. To her, the idea of Meghan attending Katherine's funeral felt like an intrusion, almost a mockery. Katherine admired Katherine's quiet dignity, her humility, her years of service. Meghan represented the opposite in her eyes. And though Katherine may not have spoken harshly, her silence carried weight. Her lack of support for Meghan's attendance sealed the decision. Camilla. The Queen Consort was said to be even more blunt. She had been painted as the villain in Harry's book, accused of scheming, of leaking, of sacrificing others to protect her reputation. To Camilla, Meghan's presence would have been intolerable. Why should she stand in the same room as someone who publicly dragged her name through the mud? Why should she pretend to mourn side by side with a woman who had accused the family of cruelty and racism? Camilla's position was firm. Meghan had no place at this funeral. And then, of course, the Duke of Kent himself. The man at the center of it all. He was unshaken by his decision. To him, cutting Harry off wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. A funeral was sacred. His wife's memory deserved honor, not headlines. He refused to allow it to become another stage for the Sussex drama. His stance was final. So what did they do next? They planned. Behind the scenes, palace officials began drafting contingency strategies. Security was instructed to prepare for every possibility, including the unlikely but still imaginable scenario that Meghan might try to appear uninvited. Communication teams prepared statements, carefully worded to emphasize the funeral's dignity and Katherine's legacy, while steering attention away from family drama. They knew the press would swarm at the first hint of division. They needed to control the narrative. And here's where it gets fascinating. While the royals scrambled to preserve silence, whispers began to leak. Small, subtle hints to trusted journalists. Not direct quotes, not official statements, but just enough to shape the story. It was Harry's decision to come alone. Meghan chose to remain in California out of respect. These weren't lies, necessarily, but they weren't the full truth either. They were damage control, a carefully spun version of events designed to soften the blow, to paint the absence not as rejection but as choice. But do you believe it? Do you think Meghan really chose to stay away? Or do you think the palace wanted us to believe that? Because here's the irony. The harder the palace tried to silence the scandal, the louder it seemed to grow. Every whisper, every leak, every subtle spin only fueled speculation. Why wasn't Meghan welcome? What really happened in that phone call? Was Harry furious? Was Meghan devastated? Or was this all part of a larger game being played behind closed doors? And this leads to the contradiction that defines the monarchy itself. They thrive on silence. They survive on secrecy. But in today's world, secrecy is fuel. Silence is noise. The less they say, the more people speculate. And in their attempt to bury the story of the call, they only fed it. Now let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Catherine's funeral was meant to honor her life of humility, of quiet service. Yet here we are, talking not about her music, her charity, her legacy, but about Meghan and Harry once again. Isn't that the cruel twist? That even in death, Catherine's dignity was overshadowed by the family's fracture? But for the royals, this wasn't just about one funeral. It was about the future. They knew that if Meghan attended, it would set a precedent. It would imply reconciliation where there was none. It would suggest acceptance where only rejection lived. And that could not be allowed. So they braced themselves. They steeled their faces. They prepared for a funeral where Harry might attend alone, where questions might swirl, where the world might whisper about absence instead of legacy. Because to them, protecting the monarchy was worth more than sparing Harry's feelings. But here's the cliffhanger you didn't expect. While the royals planned their defense, Meghan herself was planning something else. She may not have been welcome at the funeral, but she was determined that her absence would not be silent. She would make her presence felt, one way or another. And what she did next would send shockwaves far beyond the palace walls. What happens when someone's reputation is so fractured that even their silence screams louder than their words? What happens when a woman who isn't even in the room still dominates every whisper, every headline, every photograph from a royal funeral? That was Meghan Markle's reality in the wake of Catherine's passing. She wasn't there. She wasn't invited. Yet she was everywhere. And the question that kept circling the globe like wildfire was this: had Meghan's reputation finally collapsed beyond repair? Let's be honest. Meghan has always been polarizing. To some, she's the brave truth-teller who challenged a centuries-old institution, dared to speak of racism, dared to stand up for her mental health, dared to refuse silence. To others, she's the manipulative outsider who divided brothers, humiliated a queen, and turned a prince against his blood. Two narratives, two extremes, and somewhere in the middle, the truth, or perhaps multiple truths, fighting to breathe. But Catherine's funeral crystallized the Meghan question like never before. Why? Because funerals are meant to unify. They are moments where even enemies stand side by side. Think of Diana's funeral. Charles and Diana were divorced, their marriage bitter, but Charles still walked behind her coffin. Think of Elizabeth's funeral. Nations across the world set aside political grievances to pay respect. Funerals are about dignity. And yet here, Meghan was excluded. Shut out. Left behind. That decision alone said more about her reputation within the royal family than any statement could. So let's dig deeper. Why was Meghan's reputation in ruins at this exact moment? Start with the Oprah interview. Remember that? The bombshell accusations. The claim that someone in the family speculated about Archie's skin color. The tearful revelation that Meghan contemplated suicide, and the palace ignored her pleas for help. To millions, those words painted Meghan as a victim of cruelty. But to millions more, they painted her as a manipulator, someone willing to smear her in-laws to gain sympathy. The damage was done. No one came out unscathed. Then came the Netflix docuseries. Hours of confessionals, glossy shots of Montecito, personal texts and photos laid bare for the world to see. Meghan cried. Harry fumed. Together, they told their truth. But again, the backlash came. Critics called it performative, staged, self-serving. Fans called it brave, authentic, raw. The polarization grew sharper. And then, Harry's memoir. Page after page of grievances, accusations, bitterness. He spoke of William grabbing him by the collar, of Charles pleading for peace, of Camilla sacrificing others to protect herself. And woven through it all was Meghan, the woman he defended, the woman he credited with saving him, the woman who stood at the center of the storm. By the time Katherine died, Meghan wasn't just controversial. She was radioactive. Every move she made was scrutinized. Every word she spoke was dissected, and every absence was loaded with meaning. So when she wasn't at the funeral, the question wasn't just why. It was, what does this say about her? For the royals, the answer was simple. Meghan had become a liability. Her presence would have turned grief into gossip. Her reputation, whether fair or not, was seen as toxic. Allowing her in the room would have shifted the story from Catherine's legacy to Meghan's reception. And so she was cut out. But for Meghan, the exclusion was another wound. Another piece of evidence she could point to and say, "See, they'll never accept me." And for her supporters, it was proof of cruelty. Proof that the royals would rather cling to their traditions than embrace compassion. That's the paradox of Meghan's reputation. She is both victim and villain, depending on who you ask. Let's break it down. To her supporters, Meghan represents modernity. A biracial woman who broke into one of the widest, most traditional institutions on earth. A woman who refused to shrink herself into silence. A mother who chose to protect her children from the same toxic environment that haunted Diana. To them, Meghan is the embodiment of resilience. But to her detractors, Meghan is ambition personified. A Hollywood actress who married a prince, then burned bridges when the reality didn't match her fantasy. A woman who claims to seek privacy while signing Netflix deals, memoir contracts, and Spotify podcasts. To them, she's the embodiment of hypocrisy. Which side is right? Which side is wrong? Or is the truth far more complicated, tangled in perception, prejudice, and politics? Now consider how Catherine's funeral magnified this tension. Meghan wasn't there, but her absence became the headline. People whispered, did she refuse to come? Was she banned? Did Harry not fight hard enough? Every angle dissected, every theory debated. And in that frenzy, Meghan's reputation was dragged through the mud once again. And yet, here's the twist. Even as her reputation crumbled in the UK, Meghan's absence strengthened her narrative elsewhere. In the United States, in parts of the Commonwealth, in communities sensitive to exclusion and discrimination, her not being there was seen as proof of the palace's coldness. Proof that the monarchy was incapable of forgiveness. Proof that Meghan was the outsider, the scapegoat, the woman forever marked as not enough. So ask yourself, did the Duke of Kent's rejection protect Catherine's funeral, or did it play right into Meghan's hands? Did the royals shut her out to preserve dignity, or did they gift her another chapter in her ongoing story of exclusion? Because Meghan has always been adept at turning rejection into narrative. When the press attacked her, she spoke of racism. When the palace silenced her, she spoke of mental health. When the family excluded her, she spoke of independence. And here, when she was left out of a funeral, she could frame herself once again as the woman the monarchy refused to embrace. But the danger for Meghan was this. Narratives only work when the public believes them. And by now, many were tired. Tired of the drama. Tired of the victimhood. Tired of the contradictions. To those people, Meghan's absence wasn't tragic. It was fitting. It was proof that she had finally burned her bridges beyond repair. And Harry? Caught in the middle, once again. His desperation to bring her wasn't just about love. It was about salvaging her reputation. He knew that every exclusion deepened the perception that Meghan was unwanted. He knew that every rejection fueled the narrative that she was toxic. And he fought to change it. But the hang-up from the Duke of Kent proved that his family wasn't willing to help. So here we are. Meghan's reputation, shredded in the UK, defended in the US, debated across the world. Excluded from a funeral, yet still dominating it from afar. Loved and hated in equal measure. And that raises the question, where does Meghan go from here? Does she fight back, speak out, release statements, demand justice? Or does she remain silent, letting her absence speak louder than words? Because silence, too, can be powerful. Silence, too, can be weaponized. And Meghan knows it. But here's the cliffhanger you didn't see coming. While Meghan's absence stole headlines, her next move was already being prepared. A move not of silence, but of voice. A move that would make her absence at Catherine's funeral feel less like exclusion and more like defiance. And when that move came, it didn't just shake Harry's family, it shook the world. What does a man become when every title, every role, every sense of belonging is stripped away? Is he still a prince? Is he still a son? Or is he simply a man, grasping for meaning, desperate to prove that love can stand taller than bloodlines? That was the reality facing Harry in the days after Catherine's passing. His plea to bring Meghan wasn't just about her. It was about him, about who he was allowed to be, about who he had become. Let's imagine that moment again. The phone slammed down. The Duke of Kent had made his point. Meghan was not welcome. Harry sat in silence, the weight of the rejection pressing down like stone. Now ask yourself, what kind of man was Harry in that moment? Not the spare, not the soldier, not the prince. He was a husband, and that was the identity he clung to more fiercely than anything else. But here lies the contradiction. As a son of Diana, Harry had grown up with the shadow of duty. He had been taught, from the very beginning, that being royal meant sacrifice, that your personal desires always bowed to tradition. And yet, as Meghan's husband, he had sworn another kind of vow, one of loyalty, protection, unwavering support. When those two worlds collided, which oath was stronger? Harry's plea revealed the answer. He chose Meghan. Again. Always. Even when it meant humiliation. Even when it meant rejection. Even when it meant being cut off mid-sentence by a family member who once represented unity. But was this noble loyalty, or was it desperation? That's the heart of the matter. Because if you look closely, Harry's insistence was more than love. It was a lifeline. He didn't just want Meghan at his side for comfort. He needed her there to survive the icy atmosphere of a royal funeral. Imagine him walking into that cathedral alone, surrounded by stiff faces. His brother refusing eye contact. His sister-in-law looking past him. His father torn but cold. Would he crumble without Meghan's hand to squeeze? Would he falter under the weight of their collective silence? In many ways, Harry's plea was less about Meghan's right to attend and more about his fear of attending without her. But here's where it gets even more complex. Meghan wasn't just his wife, she was his shield, his armor. She was the proof that he had chosen a new identity, that he wasn't bound by the same rules anymore. To bring Meghan would have been a statement. I am not just your son. I am not just your brother. I am my own man, with my own family, my own loyalty. And that's why his desperation cut so deep. Because in that moment, Harry wasn't just asking to bring his wife. He was asking to be recognized for who he had become. But the royals didn't see it that way. To them, Harry was still the prince who turned his back. Still the spare who had betrayed their trust. Still the boy who grew up in their world but chose another. They weren't ready to acknowledge his new identity. They weren't ready to let Meghan stand beside him. And so, the plea fell flat. Now let's talk about Harry as a son. Because for all his insistence on being a husband first, the role of son still haunted him. He had lost his mother in the most brutal way. His father had become distant, his stepmother controversial. And now, his calls for acceptance were being rejected once again. How many times can a man be told no by his family before he stops trying? Harry's plea to bring Meghan wasn't just for himself. It was for Diana's memory. Remember, Diana was the outsider too. The woman who never fit in. The woman who was betrayed, silenced, cast aside. By insisting on Meghan's presence, Harry was also fighting for his mother's ghost, saying, "You will not do to my wife what you did to my mother." But the irony? The royals heard something else entirely. They didn't hear a son defending his mother's memory. They heard a husband trying to hijack his wife into a sacred farewell. They heard strategy, not love. They heard manipulation, not mourning. Isn't it tragic that the same plea could mean loyalty to one person and betrayal to another? Let's turn to Harry as a prince. Because even if he insists he's left the monarchy behind, the truth is, it's still in him. The world still calls him Prince Harry. The titles may be stripped, the duties abandoned, but the identity lingers. And with that identity comes expectation. People expect him to honor tradition, to uphold dignity, to remember that funerals are not his stage. But Harry doesn't see himself as a prince anymore. Not in the same way. He sees himself as free. Yet freedom without recognition feels hollow. So he clings to Meghan, the one person who validates his choice to leave, the one person who insists he is more than his title. That's why the phone call mattered. It wasn't just about Katherine's funeral. It was about whether the royals would acknowledge the man Harry had chosen to be. Their rejection was more than personal, it was existential. And so Harry sat, caught between identities. A son who still